Hey there, Internet. My name is Jack Packard's Coconut Ass.
I'm Darren Mooney's Shining Bald Head.
And I'm KC Wosu. Hi.
This week on A Marvelous Escape, we will talk about episode 6 of WandaVision, an all-new Halloween spooktacular. An episode that very conveniently forgets that the 90s existed. So hello and welcome. This is A Marvelous Escape.
To kick things off, I wanted to make a comment about the 90s thing, because when I rewatched the show with my significant other sometime after our last podcast, and she made the comment that it seemed like they moved from the 80s to the 90s within that same episode. Because in the earlier part of the episode before the credits ran, you could see they had like the really crazy hair. They were talking about jazzercising and whatnot. And by the time they came back to them after they did, the sword aside, their hair had flattened out some. They were wearing more natural clothing. And it did seem like time had passed since the very last time you saw them.
Interesting.
So they might have mushed those two eras together.
I mean, it's worth noting that we did point out Fuller House, which Jack had assumed had run in the 90s because it ran so much in the 90s, did run across that decade from 1987 to 1995. So that's kind of what I was thinking in terms of being generous and giving it a pass. It's like, okay, fine. Our late 80s sitcom is also a mid to early 90s sitcom. Much like The Brady Bunch, which premiered in 1969, mostly counts as a 70s sitcom.
It's like, I think it speaks a lot to kind of the 90s as a decade does kind of start the whole like lack of a generational identity thing. That's when swing music came back into fashion, which was, throwback to a different generation. So as someone who was a teenager and, kind of grew up primarily in the late 80s, 90s, we didn't have a super big identity of our own. What I will say is I have been listening to a ton of third wave ska just to make up for it. So just Real Big Fish, Goldfinger, Mustard Plug. I need that 90s.
We did have Smash Mouth, right?
That might have been even 2000s.
When you say we, who exactly are you?
Who am I speaking on behalf of?
The collective we will always have Smash Mouth.
But no, I mean, the 90s is this kind of weird historical lacuna because it's the end of history. It's the point at which, like, the Cold War's over. Everybody assumed liberal democracy had won. It was like, well, now we're just going to live in a perpetual now. The world is a utopia. There's no need for things to change. There's never going to be any, like, equivalent war to the Cold War. Nothing is ever going to happen. Nothing's ever going to change, baby. We don't need a culture of our own because we're standing at the end of history astride like a colossus and can look back and pick what we want from it. And boy, were we wrong.
Absolutely. And they went full hard Malcolm in the Middle. Like even
Absolutely.
The font was Malcolm in the Middle. The only upsetting part, and I had to rewatch the credits, is they didn't reach out to They Might Be Giants to do the theme song. It's like, come on. They're not doing anything right now. Come on. Come on, Disney. Throw a bone to They Might Be Giants.
The way you frame the 90s legitimately sounds like it's the teenage years of just history in general. Like, everything's great. I know everything already. Nothing else needs to come after this. Like, that's exactly what that sounds like. So I think it's very fitting for the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because it is. I think it was Philip Wagner described it as life between two deaths, because you have the fall of the Berlin Wall and you have September 11th. And so obviously, like, those are two era-defining events. But in the middle of the 90s, for a large swath of particularly Western culture, you have this idea of, no, nothing's wrong. We're making money. Crime is falling. The government is stable. What could we possibly complain about? And, boy, were we wrong. What I will say, actually, because I want to mention Malcolm in the Middle very quickly, one of the things that I actually loved about this episode, and Jack mentioned they went full Malcolm in the Middle. It was almost like there's very little of anything else, because we mentioned in earlier episodes that's like, oh, there's a little bit of Bewitched in there, there's a little bit of the Dick Van Dyke Show going on there, there's a little bit of I Love Lucy. With this, it is very much pure, uncut, unfiltered Malcolm in the Middle. And I loved that, and I loved it because it did that thing the show has done that is remarkable, and the thing that I love about the show, which is the blending of form and function. Because if you look at what Malcolm in the Middle did, and Malcolm in the Middle is largely underappreciated in sitcom history, it very much changed the format of like what we expect sitcoms to be. It got rid of the laugh track. It switched from multi-camera to single camera. It used wide-angle lenses and extreme close-up on character, which is something that this episode does in particular. And you'll notice it, for example, during the shots of Petro when he's lying on the couch, where he's an extreme close-up and the kids are over his shoulder, or the sequence when Wanda closes the door and it's used for a jump scare when Petro turns up behind her. But even more than that, the fact that it did those things, it got rid of the studio audience, it switched to a single camera mode, allowed it to be more adventurous in terms of form. It used location shooting a lot more than previous sitcoms had, because obviously if you have a live audience and if you have a set and a camera setup, you can't take your audience outside that. And again, thinking mind, if you go to like Friends as one of the great 90s sitcoms, whenever they went anywhere, it was an event episode. It was a big deal. Like when they went to London, it was an hour-long special. When they went to the frickin' beach, it was an hour-long special. Like, that's how kind of like tied to the set and setup that like 90s and previous generation sitcoms were. And what I love about this is ignoring the whole plot and the deconstruction aspect of it and like the wonderful little gags and the way in which they kind of tie the uncanniness and the unpleasantness and the simmering tension and the idea that mum and dad don't really love each other, which are all Malcolm in the Middle ideas in a sitcom. But the fact in which they tie Vision leaving the like familiar rotation of sets within which he's moved. So, you know, the office, the garden, the house itself. Vision literally wanders outside of those spaces for the first time because he can. Because now he's left the 3-camera audience setup and they've moved to a single camera without laugh track approach. So like Malcolm in the Middle could do, like, if you remember Malcolm in the Middle, the second season premiere is literally them stuck in a traffic jam in the desert. And it works beautifully. Or Bowling Alley, which is one of my favorite episodes, which is like them doing sliding doors. Like, what if mum takes us bowling? What if dad takes us bowling? And what are the differences between those two? And I kind of love that, like, this managed to take the production of Malcolm in the Middle, the things that make Malcolm in the Middle special compared to contemporary sitcoms, compared to earlier sitcoms, and make it like a thematic and plot point.
Well, this is something we dipped into a little bit last week about like, wait a minute, is this show brilliant? Which is like, because if we, you know, apply that same logic to also the things that happen in the show expands its scope. The bubble that Wanda makes literally expands. And it's just like, the writers of this are huge sitcom nerds, and I'm kind of loving that.
I mean, like, I'll be critical about the show outside of Westview. Like, I mean, again, like this episode, like previous episodes, it's like Darren loves the stuff in the bubble. The stuff outside the bubble, Darren can take or leave.
Also, go ahead, Casey.
No, I was just going to agree with Darren. Like, I see what you meant when you were saying you were lamenting the eventual push to pull in the rest of the MCU stuff. Because now I'm seeing it more, like, when they do focus on the stuff that's outside the bubble, that's where they have to push the story forward. Because if they just stayed inside, it would be just way too abstract, confusing, and like it would linger too much on the sitcom tropes, which is fun in and of its right, but it doesn't push an actual story forward. So like it would be fine if this was an actual episodic show where, you know, each episode didn't necessarily have much to do with the other, but they are, you know, a serialized story that's being told. So if you don't get that, that's where that other half of the audience starts to get really frustrated. So like I do still like that they've switched it now to basically just going back and forth between inside and outside.
Yeah, no, I think it works really great. You know, getting into kind of the meat of the episode. This is the Halloween episode. We finally get those visuals from the trailers.
Jack was right twice last week.
I can't believe I called Malcolm in the Middle, even though it's not a 90s show. Because Broken Clock is right twice a day, and I'll take it.
I feel cheated. I feel cheated that I was like, no, Jack, you can't do that because technically it doesn't apply to the rules. And you're like, screw the rules. You're right. And what does this teach our kids, Jack? What does this teach our kids?
Do whatever you want all the time. Just do whatever you want all the time. We get their wonderful Halloween costumes, and as someone who is a nerd, by the way. Yeah. I think that is also brilliant meta advertising because everyone now has a low effort DIY Halloween costume idea, couples Halloween costume idea, right? Look, I'm Vision and Wanda from the show, huh?
Petro is the particularly low quality one, where it's just a shirt and jean cutoffs with a little slash on it. And I love it so much. Like, this is the thing where, like, when I complain about, like, excessive fan service or excessive fan wank or all that sort of stuff going on, where I'm like, oh no, are we setting up Secret Invasion by having the 10 minutes inside Sword HQ? I'm like, I don't really like that. But this is the fan service Darren is here for. It's like low effort cosplay. Everyone's welcome. Kind of like, just let's have fun with the concept aspect of it.
Absolutely.
And another kind of hint / misdirect. We've been wondering if Agnes is Agatha, right? Like, that's been a big question. We finally get to see her get taken out of the mind control, and she really doesn't give us anything. Like, she really does seem like she's a complete victim, yet she is dressed in a witch's outfit. So they knew from the very beginning that everyone would think that that's what she was supposed to be, but they still haven't given up, that information yet, which I think is... They know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly. Did you notice that they don't give her a surname in the opening titles? She gets Agnes, and it's Billy and Tommy Maximov. But Agnes doesn't get a surname, which I thought was a really, again, getting stirring.
The fact that she's even included in the credits for the show to begin with, like, she's considered a part of Wanda's family in that sense. Like, why is she in the credits in the very opening? Like, she's not just at the end. Like, she shows up in that original role.
And around the kids, which has been a recurring motif throughout the show. It's been Agnes basically pushing this idea of kids. As you point out, jazzercising getting the kids to sleep in the previous episode and stuff like that. So very much, again, there's a sense of, maybe she's nothing, but maybe there's like breadcrumbs being kind of sowed. And again, the fact that even like the little kind of bejeweled print on her kind of tracksuit bottoms says naughty, and as you point out, she's dressed as a witch. It's like, how do you not read into that? It's fantastic. I kind of love how geared this is towards fueling internet speculation.
It's because they're playing with us. And by the way, that's a threefer for Jack being right. And we get full confirmation. Wanda's doing everything. She's the real bad guy. Oh, or is she? Come on.
No, hold on. I do think there's a big or is she coming in particular. Really? Really? You guys didn't get that sense of the or is she?
Okay, we get a real talk between Wanda and Peter. This is not Pietro. This is Peter. We get a real talk between Wanda and Peter where Peter is super in on the bit and they have a real conversation. And Wanda says, yeah, like, I'm doing this. Peter's like, yeah, it's cool that you're doing this. I can't believe how powerful you are. Peter, by the way, also a zombie, but a zombie... with a different skin from someone from a different universe. So also, world is breaking a little bit.
Yeah. Well, come back to Peter. There's a bit I have some stuff I know about.
You're
Peter.
right. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Wanda has the conversation. Like, I don't know exactly how I'm doing this, but I sure am doing this. And as soon as Vision is in trouble, she does it harder. This is Wanda, all Wanda.
Okay, crazy idea coming at you, because the way that this show seems to be pointing, we kind of alluded to it last week with Tyler Hayward, the guy who's like, and Casey's entirely right, he's the 80s military blowhard character, right? Okay, what we know about him is that he's head of SWORD. We know that SWORD was conducting experiments on Vision's body because they had it in storage somewhere. We know that she took the body away. We also get the impression, like, look at the way in which he says, first of all, he really wants to break free. And the fact that he's tracking Vision rather than tracking her. My crazy speculation is, and again, I'm willing to concede I'm probably wrong, but I'm at this point, the feeling that I have is that SWORD have done something stupid or something crazy. That's triggered, and it's put the whole town kind of frozen. And Wanda is animating it, because the way in which that conversation with herself and Petro is discussed, where it's like, oh, the kids, they're just kind of asleep and out of town, and the way in which, like, as Vision moves further out, and again, it's a wonderful sequence, it's wonderfully creepy. As Vision moves out and out from town, he notices people who are, like, stuck in motion, doing repetitive tasks over and over again. Obviously, like, they're in the background of a sitcom. But the fact in which Peter suggests that, well, look, the kids, where were they up until now? Were they just in bed? Were they sleeping? Were they staying there? The fact that, oh, look, you kept couples together. You kept their personalities the same. You gave them better jobs. I do wonder if basically this is a situation where Wanda found something and has basically been manipulating it and perhaps even containing it. That's kind of what I'm speculating. That's
an interesting take, because when Vision started moving further away and seeing kind of the glitchy parts of the neighborhood, the first thing that came to mind to me was like that movie, The 13th Floor, Do you guys
Yeah.
remember that movie?
Yeah, the
Like,
AI
where
simulation one.
Yeah, the AI is a simulation. They had to basically go past all the road signs and whatnot. Then you get to the end of the simulation. So I thought of it more like processing power. So like Wanda, the stuff she's focused on heavily is surrounding her. The further you get away from Wanda or the edges of the bubble, because I'm assuming, and this is something I wanted to bring up for a while now.
Yeah.
The show is called WandaVision. It's gonna, I promise, it's gonna roll back into itself. The show is called WandaVision. It's not just because it stars Wanda and Vision. It's because it's Wanda's view of the world. The world literally revolves around Wanda. So Wanda is the epicenter of the Hex. Like, I'm sure their house is positioned in the very center of that entire hexagonal space. And so the further you get to the edges, she really doesn't care or focus much on. So the people who are out on the fringes have that much animation. Like, they're either frozen in place because she's, you know, if she were to maybe go closer to that area, those people would then reanimate, you know? So
Sure.
it's based on her focal point.
Yeah,
So-
like, and I'm with you there, and we get some seeds as far as like Darcy, like digging through evil military guys' files and saying, oh, you're doing bad.
And like, by the way, as somebody who appreciates puns, I love that the plan to manipulate Vision is called Cataract. I really appreciated that. If I'm running an evil secret organization, I want cool code names like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like things like the moment where Tyler kind of like, where they have the big confrontation early in the episode where Tyler's like, well, you weren't there when the superheroes disappeared. You had the luxury of coming back. You didn't know how tough it was. Now, let's ignore the fact that according to Endgame, like Endgame opens during the blip or during the kind of gap or during the snap with the superheroes complaining that they literally do not have enough to do. It's like, man, life is really quiet now that half the universe's population's disappeared. So I
Well,
kind of feel
that
like
was-
Tyler's maybe laying it on a bit heavy.
That was a few years into Endgame starts a few years into the blip. We
Yes,
can
it does.
only assume that the first couple of months, at very least, were incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
I know,
I'm
but the
assuming
way
for,
that he
I'm assuming
talks
for
about
regular
it-
people, it stayed crazy. Like, for the superheroes, they were like, okay, a bunch of my friends are gone. But, you know, I
Right.
still live in this cool-ass tower, just hanging out with my bros all day. There aren't any supervillains running around, so I guess I got nothing to do. Meanwhile, Captain America was running like a support group for people who had family members and stuff who disappeared. So I think the rest of
Right.
regular humans were legit distraught. For
Yeah,
the whole
I'm
5 years.
gonna say, like, he was perfectly in his right to be like, shit went sideways for a long time, and we kind of know that from Endgame, like when with
With the camera pan over and the car parks
his-
and all that sort of stuff.
Jeremy Renner. That's what.
Oh,
this is me.
Hawkeye.
Hawkeye.
Yeah.
This is me.
I'm like throwing arrows. I'm throwing arrows. Yeah, like darts.
I'm like, what are you, fishing? Like, what's happening
Yeah,
here?
right. My mime work is not up to snuff, but he turned into Ronin so he could take out bad elements because there were bad elements, like manipulating the blip. So no, things were sideways. I get that. I also I understand that we need a military bad guy to be the military bad guy, but we're also hitting that point of cheese where you're like, yeah, all right, we get it. We get fine.
I kind of get this. Like, the way in which this is going is the way in which, again, the same way Avengers went with its superhero story, which is like, man, these vigilantes who operate without any oversight are cool because they wear costumes. But these vigilantes who operate without any oversight are not cool because they wear uniforms. And like, I say that I love Avengers, to be clear, although that's probably a thorny statement at the moment. But no, I mean to go... Yeah, I know. Yeah, let's not get into that, unfortunately. Good art, bad people. But I mean, the thing is basically, the way in which it's being set up is very much like, Tyler did something, Tyler's up to something, Tyler knows something. And the way in which that Vision kind of breakout happens, the way in which it's framed, so the audience is meant to be, Darcy's like, help him, and he's like, no, I'd rather just watch him die slowly, because this will further my experiment or research.
I guess it does seem like a little bit of a stretch to say that like something was already happening there and Wanda went there to help them. I guess is to me that's a bit of a stretch.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to discount it because you are a smart man, and so anything is possible.
I mean, we haven't really figured out the significance of Westview, New Jersey, other than the name being Westview.
Right.
Like,
Other than just being
so-
kind of like an idyllic quote unquote idyllic, suburb, right?
And within, like, apparently flying distance or drone flying distance of Sword's headquarters as well.
Sure.
One assumes she took Vision and went there directly. Which, again, opens up, all sorts of questions about what the hell Sword are doing, where it's like, oh, by the way, Wanda Maximoff broke in and stole Vision, and we're only mentioning it now because everybody's aware that she's here now. I mean, it does seem slightly suspicious that it's a bit like, oh, well, we had this footage just hanging around anyway. We're just showing it to you now, completely out of context.
So if Hayward is, let's say, one of the bad actors involved in starting all of this stuff, would that then put the kind of the aura of Sword as like being a villainous organization? Because there's supposed to be another good guy entity, right?
Yeah, I mean, but then again, you had the same thing with S.H.I.E.L.D., right? I mean, like, not even going to, like, the Winter Soldier or anything like that, going back to Avengers, where it's like, let's nuke New York as a starting point.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like if you could... It's a situation where I imagine they can go, oh, by the way, Monica, would you like to head Sword now? Because you were meant to, because your mother was in charge. So, wow, if only we had a character that we trusted running this organization who may also now have superpowers.
Yeah, like, to me, this is very classic standard, like, bureaucracy with a bias against superpowered individuals. This is a Thunderbolt Ross. This is like a junior, Thunderbolt Ross Jr. Just, oh, I'm a bad guy and super people. Oh, they do bad things. I'm going to shoot first and regret that later. Always.
Which one of you is a sassy best friend? I was thinking about that the whole ride home.
And
waiting for the first one of you to talk, and I was going to deliver that zinger.
And I love it that Jimmy Woo talked right after me, going like, it's me, bitch. Because, by the way, he is. Jimmy Woo is the sassy best friend. Yeah.
Want to see a magic trick?
Right. Okay, so information that we have gathered in this episode. This is, obviously, I thought this was a very good episode, very fun. I am a huge fan of Malcolm in the Middle. But the information that we gathered in this episode is also important. The information I think we gathered is that Wanda, yes, is doing this. The information that we also gathered is we see Pietro's bullet-ridden body. The last time we saw a corpse, we found out that, yes, it was a real corpse. And so the other universe and the corpse universe are melding, and that's where things get wobbly.
Yeah, because, I mean, the core assumption last week was that it was Evan Peters, like, as the version of Quicksilver from Days of Future Past and from Apocalypse and from Dark Phoenix. However, he clearly has the memories of the version who appeared in Age of Ultron, because, like, the last thing I remember is getting shot in the street and dying, which is very strange, because, I mean, I know that, like, one of his last scenes in Dark Phoenix, because I was one of the 12 people who saw that movie, was being in the middle of a street and getting knocked down and getting a skint knee that basically took him out of action for the rest of the movie, because, dear God, we needed to rewrite this thing somehow. But, I mean, it's kind of interesting that, like, they're bringing in Evan Peters, but they're being very coy as to whether or not he's playing the same character he played in the X-Men universe, which I think is very interesting. I think we're meant to read him as the same version as the Aaron Taylor Johnson version. By the way, I love the little joke where, like, as he wanders off, she says, "kick ass." It's like, yes. Yes. Yes, we like remember the movie that starred both Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor Johnson. Thank you very
that
much.
One felt kind of like a gimme. I'm like, is that a clue saying, okay, she's aware of the greater multiverse? Or was that just a cool reference to the fact that everyone knows that they were both in that movie, and that's kind of how they spun off and became both the same character in two different franchises? This is just so weird.
I love the idea Wanda was traveling through the multiverse and just found Kick-Ass and grabbed the wrong kid. it's like I wanted the one who looked like Aaron Taylor Johnson, but I got Evan Peters, so I guess that's what we're doing.
Oh, and they did show Aaron Taylor Johnson in the footage.
Previously, yeah.
Yeah, like they actually showed him, his face getting shot in that moment, and then, Evan Peters basically taking his place. So I do wonder, like, what is the significance of it being him, that specific actor? Because clearly she could have just brought back that body, right? Like, we don't... Because he did have, like, the bullet holes in him, like, why did it have to be a different Pietro versus just the one who was shot?
Because he was available, Casey.
Because of contract negotiation. Right, well, and, like, outside of the rules, we know that it was just because of contracts and weirdness. But the question is, what are the rules within the universe, because that's all that matters, is we're trying to understand the rules that exist within the universe of the MCU. And so we thought we knew what the rules were, which is she plucked him from another reality. But now those rules are blurring as he has bullet holes and died on the street, which is not how his character from the other Marvel movies died. So,
I really want like the MCU's version of like Evan Peters, and I'm not talking about the character Evan Peters plays. I'm talking about the actor from American Horror Story, Evan Peters, to have been like an informant for the FBI who had to hide in Westview, and it just turns out that Wanda decided the actor Evan Peters, beloved from I guess the MCU's version of Elvis and Nixon, is now going to play Petro. That's what I really want. I know it's never going to happen, but that's what I aspire to.
right.
But on the subject of rules, I think we got another interesting one, because I was wondering, like, what is it Vision has or the kids have that give them, you know, some sort of dampener to Wanda's influence, right? Apparently Pietro also has the same thing, because he can basically just talk candidly with her about everything that's going on. He knows the rules for his character that he's supposed to follow, but he can just choose to jump out of it and talk about, you know, the world in like the third person.
I have a crazy guess here, and I think it's the same reason. It's the same reason that like Vision is able to do it. It's because unlike the other people who are having their own personalities rewritten in the same way, like as he points out, the couples are still together. Everybody's working basically better jobs. Families, you know, they're you know, in many cases they're similar enough to who they were. With the dead characters, and I'm thinking Petro and I'm thinking Vision, and again maybe the kids. Do they exist? Are they figments of her imagination? Who knows? But my theory might be that because she's creating those effectively whole scale, possibly, in that like she's creating Vision maybe from her memories, or creating Petro from her memories, perhaps, and imposing them on something else, on like the dead body of Vision. She's animating him and working him like a puppet, for example. I think they represent maybe, again, her subconscious, maybe, and that's why they're able to have that conversation with her. Because Petra's able to just repeatedly bring up, because he knows. And he's more aware, like you know that Herb is aware, because you had that sequence with Herb, like where he says, "Can I change anything for you, Wanda? Does anything need changing?" But again, it's notable that like in the earlier episode, it was Agnes and Herb who were there when Vision was like, and it's like you know, there's something odd with Monica and Agnes like. And Herb's like, oh, fine.
These rules have been pretty consistent for me. Like even from episode 1, when you know the wife was looking at Wanda saying stop it when he was choking. I feel like everyone has some level of awareness that they're being messed with, but they're going along with the rules because they're in pain otherwise, right? And so, but the neat meta narrative of Peter being the guest in this episode is usually the guest's function, to like have a stern talking to or teach a lesson to whomever needs the lesson taught to. And so like he's even existing while breaking the rules. He's sticking with the rules because he's trying to teach Wanda the lesson of the episode, which is super neat.
Yeah, well, he explicitly says as much. Like, I'm playing the role that you want me to play, because you're programming this like a sitcom.
Yeah.
So I'm the kooky uncle who comes up and shakes things up and upsets the apple cart. And then sort of like gets everybody wound up and kind of brings all this tension to the surface. I'm serving the plot function that you chose for me to play, basically.
And while I'm serving that, I'm technically breaking your other rules, but that's super, super interesting. I think like there are some really neat like establishing rules in this, which is like the big question is about like the things that Wanda creates. Like we already know that if she morphs reality, it stays the same. But what about the things that she created? And so like we're talking about Vision's personality, Pietro's personality. A neat thing that I caught in this episode was after Vision decides to put on his normal MCU Avengers gear, and he's having that conversation with Agnes, there is a very clear shot of his wedding ring while he's talking to her, something that Wanda created out of nothing. And even though he was able to swap his outfit, and even though he specifically said, this was the only outfit available to me, Wanda, he wasn't able to, or chose not to, take off his wedding ring. And I thought that was a really neat little seed planted for the fact that Wanda possibly is able to create something out of nothing.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that works. And again, I actually really liked the function of kind of Petro in here, where he's playing Francis from Malcolm in the Middle. And indeed, like you can tell right down to like and again, it's one of those things where, because I grew up with this, I remember the pilot of Malcolm in the Middle uses one of the exact same setups and shots that it has here. The sequence where they're explaining why Francis got sent to military school. And it's a sequence of the camera just looking at him, and in the background there's a car and it's on fire. That's pretty much the exact same camera setup they use when he's like, remember our childhood in Eastern Europe. Because it's the shot of the kids, and there's a car in the background, and there's gunfire happening as well. And it's like, yes, it's exactly the same shot, but I love that they basically did that with Petro. And I think Evan Peters is really, really good at that. In fact, I'd actually imagine that Aaron Taylor-Johnson probably would not be. But that may be my own bias creeping in there, or petering in there, if you will.
Ooh, much better. Yeah, I see him as more of a serious person who wouldn't be able to commit to such a bit. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I think like we're getting to an interesting point. Obviously, Monica Rambeau and Agent Wu are off to meet the other special guest star, the person who's going
guy.
The guy.
Because there was some talk about the gender, because I think that the French or Spanish subtitles had gendered the astrophysicist, or sorry, the aerospace engineer as female. But the fact that she says, we're going to meet my guy, suggests maybe.
That could be a red herring, because a guy can be gender neutral, I say, as part of the patriarchy.
We're just applying it everywhere. Everybody is a guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey guys, everyone. You say hey guys.
Hey guys.
I impose gender bias everywhere I go. Absolutely.
Yeah. Fair point.
But we're still thinking
it's a bit of a stretch, is it?
Guy... I mean, you literally just answered my question with that pun. So we're still thinking that the guy is going to be the introduction of Franklin. I'm sorry, not Franklin. Is it Reed?
Yeah, I don't think you're reading too much into it there. Yeah.
Franklin's this kid. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, Franklin is the kid. I think that I still am wary on that. I just like business-wise, I can't imagine them also dropping a Fantastic Four reference into the show. That's just me completely meta. So I would genuinely be surprised if it was Reed Richards.
Even if it was just one episode where he shows up, he Deus Ex Machinas the hell out of whatever's going on, and then they go back to the following thing. Like, I think that's like late in the season. I think that's enough to just be like, oh, cool, that was cool that he was there, and then we'll hear more from him in the future.
Oh, hold on. Now I'm wondering, is Reed Richards the cameo? Because Paul Bettany's like, it's an actor that I always wanted to work with. So is it going to be somebody super famous playing Reed Richards, possibly? I don't know.
It's very possible. I think like if we wouldn't have gotten the universe swap of Pietro, this idea would be on the table. But because they're throwing that in and possibly a cameo of an upcoming thing, I think that's too many things to balance. But I could be incredibly wrong.
I don't know. I think Marvel are very flexible with this sort of thing.
Fantastic.
But I will say, the ad, I really liked this week's ad. I know we've talked before about how much we like the advertisements. I really, really loved this week's advertisement, because, again, it amps up the surreality of it, where, again, and you mentioned, like, it not feeling like a 90s thing, and you're right, it is 2000s. It is very radical, man. Right down to the fact that it's a yogurt that the shark delivers while he's with attitude. He's like, bro and dude. And it's like, I remember watching these ads when I was growing up. And the way in which it gets so dark and so weird in a way that, like, the other ones are kind of creepy and uncanny, like the blinking light going on too long, but like somebody on a desert island actually turning into a skeleton. And again, that's kind of where I wonder about the kind of... Because the way in which he says, oh no, you're getting them up and about and people are moving. When Peter's talking to Wanda, he's like, oh yeah, people are staying together and at least they're active and alive. Part of me is like, well, is the alternative them just sitting there and atrophying if they don't open Wanda's magic or Yo magic? If Wanda didn't use Yo magic, would people just be sitting there atrophying? That's kind of what I'm wondering, you know? Again, maybe reading too much into subtext, I think.
I mean, but all the other commercials up until now focus on something specific, like to her, like
from her past.
Yeah, not necessarily things that are happening in the moment. So, like, that's why I'm maybe hesitant to think it's referencing something that we, the audience, don't already know about yet.
Well, what do you think it's referencing?
It could be referencing. I have two theories as far as Yo magic is concerned. One, it was the inability to use the magic that to open the magic that caused the boy on the desert island to presumably die of starvation.
A trophy, yeah.
That could be mirroring of her inability to use her magic to take care of Vision. That led to him dying by the hands of Thanos. That could be that.
That's really close to what I'm thinking.
Okay.
I think that boy is Pietro. Like, if she was as powerful now as she was then, she could have easily been able to save her brother.
Sure.
Like, so because she wasn't able to access whatever power was in her, and he died as a result. Like, it's like her own survivor's guilt. I think is what that is.
Okay. Because again, I'm thinking like they do go chronologically, because you start with the kind of like the Stark toaster, which is the trauma of her parents, and then you jump forward and it's kind of like the Hydra stuff, and then you jump forward again and it's Lagos. So now I'm thinking, I suppose it could be the end of Infinity War, where she's unable to use her magic. I see you can't call it home magic because that sounds terrible. Her magic. I want to preserve the kind of like 90s-ness of it, but her magic doesn't sound appropriately. Anyway, she can't use her magic or her version of Yo magic to stop Thanos. So I think
it sounds like Yo magic, like just like a demonic way of saying your magic. You can't use your magic.
Yeah, you can't use that's what I'm saying. So
use your magic.
You can't do that with her. Yeah, you can't do that with her. You can't do that with her magic.
Yeah, like I think that's how you can read that. I also think that every episode has had an incident in which she uses her magic to help in a situation, and that magic always goes awry. Like in the earlier episodes when she was using her magic to make the dinner, but then the dinner went all wonky when she used her magic to make the kids, and the kids went all wonky. There has been a running gag of her using her magic to get out of situations that end up getting worse because of using her magic. And so the other reading of that is it's just part of that meta narrative of her not being in control of herself and foreshadowing a villainous turn.
Well, also the idea that we got last week in the very special episode, an appropriately named very special episode, that like Wanda's using her magic to avoid dealing with guilt and with trauma and with like processing her grief. And so again, you wonder how that reflects on. I suppose that's her version of it, because they're all as kind of Casey pointed out. It's Wanda's vision. That's what we're seeing. It's Wanda's vision of the world. So it's how she sees herself. Quick thing I want to mention actually before we wrap up: the kids. The kids are mutants. Or the kids have abilities. The kids are born with abilities. Is this the first time in the regular MCU that kids have been born with special powers as opposed to getting them via scientific experiments gone awry or technology developed or by being a god? So I'm wondering, and again, you mentioned the comic accurate costumes, by the way. Quick shout out to Wiccan, because one of the kids is dressed like Wiccan in terms of like deep cut of Marvel lore, which I did appreciate. But like that's what I'm wondering. So are these now I suppose if they're figments of her imagination, it doesn't count. And B, it doesn't necessarily mean that mutants are coming. It could be, again, similar to the Pietro thing, possibly be a red herring or opening the door and kind of not stepping through it yet or until we get to the finale. But I am wondering, like, do the kids having powers and being born with powers suggest that we are moving towards more X-Men, Marvel kind of, alignment, as it were?
I just got a crazy idea.
Okay, go. Yes. You've been right so far. So go with it.
I just got a crazy idea. Okay, so I'm gonna take a step back for a second and assume that Darren is correct in that the town was under some sort of stasis before Wanda got there, and Wanda is using her magic to help the people and also like help herself in the process, right?
Yeah, it red. She turned it red. Like she literally just turned it red, which is like, this is mine now.
This is mine now, right? And so like
I am the captain now.
She's helping herself in like playing out her fantasies of a family life, but if that town was in stasis pre-Wanda being in there, as is Darren's theory, what if that town had a mutant surge? What if the reason we haven't seen those kids is because a bunch of kids in those towns' powers got awakened and Sword was trying to shut it down? Wanda found out about it, went there, and is doing her things. And this is the actual start of mutants in the MCU, which is like Sword being like, all of these kids, or a bunch of these kids, or some of these kids have powers. We don't know how they got their powers, so instead of dealing with that, we are going to contain the entire town.
And, again, worth noting, and I think we mentioned it before when we talked about Sword, here it is the Sentient Weapons organization. And, I mean, it seems to be interested in alien technology as well. But they are a property associated with the X-Men franchise. Notably introduced by Joss Whedon, unfortunately, and John Cassidy, but also then developed by, say, Kieron Gillen. So they're with the X-Men corner of the universe. So I do wonder if, again, and the fact that you're seeing Wanda wearing her costumes from those early X-Men comics, you're seeing Peter wearing his costume from the early X-Men comics, whether it's going to literally happen in a sense of, well, now there are mutants, or whether it's just, like, thematically and, like, brand management-wise, pushing towards the synchronization or alignment of these properties. I think that's interesting.
Okay, you guys are putting me on a really interesting train right now.
Come on,
How much do you know
Casey.
about Monica Rambeau in the comics / Photon? Is she a mutant in that universe, or her powers come from something else?
I think they come from somewhere else. I think she's a science project. I think she's one of those kind of like science experiments.
Okay,
or was she empowered by the Kree, much like Captain Marvel? I think there's some sort of association there. I'm going to do some research as we talk.
Because I'm wondering now, they did make the reference that like Darcy says to Monica, like, your DNA or whatnot has been rewritten as you went in and out of the barrier, and you're saying you want to go back in. So clearly what they're hinting at is that her powers are going to come from Wanda's, reality abilities kind of messing with her as she's going back and forth between the barrier, right? If that's to be believed, every single person who's within that space, including all those new Sword agents who have been engulfed in it at the end of this episode, have had something happen to them because they've, been rewritten by Wanda's magic. If Monica Rambeau somehow gets powers because of this, why couldn't any or everyone else who's in that vicinity also get powers that way? And it does. And now I'm thinking, Wanda was the only character in all of the MCU other than Pietro who was a mutant, right? They just couldn't use the word. Like, no one else on the roster was an actual mutant, right?
Right.
So why not use WandaVision, the show with the only mutant in the MCU, to introduce the rest of that universe? Like, it almost seems like it has to happen.
Brand management-wise. Rambeau was exposed to extra-dimensional energy while trying to... while trying to prevent the creation of a dangerous weapon in New Orleans, working at the Harbor Patrol.
So not a mutant.
Well,
all right, that's fair.
And, well, what we could be talking about here is something similar to a new or a more recent thing that they've done in the Marvel comics, which is the what did they call it? Not the Kree bomb. The
the Terrigon mists. The Terrigon bomb.
The Terrigen bomb. Which is like a mist that enveloped the entire Earth that awoke alien DNA in a certain fraction of the people. It was basically like a rebranding of mutants.
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly why I don't imagine they're going to do it, because the reason that they did that in the comics was because Fox owned mutants, and like Marvel were like, at some point we are going to want to use mutants in our films, but we can't call them mutants because Fox owned them. So what if there was this thing that was like being a mutant, but it wasn't being a mutant, and we owned the rights to it?
Yeah.
What if we did that? And like you see that with like they did it with the Scarlet Witch and with Quicksilver as well, where they retconned it so that Magneto wasn't their father anymore in the comics, because that makes it easier for the alignment of brand properties when Daddy Magneto is owned by the X-Men, by Fox. Now, I don't see them doing that, and in fact, actually, what tends to happen is, rather than the comics leading the films, the comics tend to serve as like signposts or rough ideas or images or kind of iconography. It's like, okay, I like that shot of, is it Surge the Executioner, like on the bridge with the machine guns, so I'm going to put that in Thor Ragnarok. I'm not actually going to adapt like Walt Simonson's Thor. I'm going to take that image and put it in that context, that sort of thing. Whereas on the other hand, the films do tend to lead the comics because obviously more people see movies and TV shows than read comic books, particularly now. So I don't, now that they own the kind of mutants, I don't see the movies doing the really awkward contortions to allow intellectual property that kind of pushes away from the versions of the characters who've been appearing in Saturday morning cartoons for decades.
Yeah, you're right.
I imagine that they're going to go mutants. They're going to go with like the brand name that we recognize. Because again, like literally, they literally had an event called Inhumans versus X-Men, in which the Inhumans decimated the mutant population. And like in one of the least subtle like metatextual elements, it was discovered that the Terrigen mists were toxic to mutants. Just in case you get that, like, because Fox won't share our toys with us, we're going to possibly kill all these characters off and replace them with the ones that we control via our intellectual property. And by the way, fun fact again, sorry, we'll wind up now. I know we're going long, apologies. But one of my favorite details, and most depressing details, is that, like, if you look at, like, the Marvel brand management through the decades, I believe there was a court case in the 1990s that determined, because of intellectual property rights, you have to determine whether characters are human beings or representations of human beings. And it was decided that mutants are not legally human beings, according to intellectual property law.
Oh,
so super problematic.
It's one again. It's a very boring intellectual property law case, but I remember that jumping out at me. It's like, okay, fine.
I think that's fair. Okay, so like for me, if we're gonna move on to predictions, my prediction, I'm sticking strong with my mutants were in the town first, and that's what drew Wanda there. And perhaps she is using her ability unconsciously, even though I hate it, and I want her to be the bad guy. I think she has a really good villainous backstory.
Yeah.
It makes a ton of sense that the reason that she went to this town was while she was getting vision from Sword, she found out that Sword was doing some weirdo stuff in this town, went to investigate because there were mutants there. That's my official prediction. What do you guys got?
Okay, next week is going to be Modern Family then. I'm going to assume that they're going to like jump from because this was the 2000s episode. I think even like the commercial for Yo Magic reminded me of the really creepy Chips Ahoy. Do you remember the Chips Ahoy commercials?
Yeah.
Where the
like
cookie
the
realizes
ones.
Yeah, the claymation one where the cookie realizes that he's going to be eaten at the birthday party. It has that kind of like morbid kind of aspect to it.
Oh no.
So
the theater in the background was showing The Incredibles, which came out in 2004. So no, this is clearly 2000.
And by the way, I love that they're chosen thematically because like Wanda and Vision are having marriage trouble and they've got twins, so we'll show the Parent Trap. And they're a superpower family that are having marital difficulties that are being like metaphorized through the language of superheroes. So we're showing the Incredibles. Love that. Anyway, quick prediction for me. The only prediction I have, next week's going to be the 2010s. It's going to be Modern Family. So they're going to get like characters talking to the camera, this false docudrama sort of style. That's my pitch. Oh, and the idea that because it's grown, because the universe has grown, because like the bubble is actually growing and expanding. If you remember, the thing about Modern Family that's so technically impressive is that it's not just one nuclear conventional family. It's several different families. So that's my speculation. It's going to be Modern Family next week. That's my pitch.
That sounds plausible. I don't really have any great predictions. I guess I'll guess at well, we never found out what happened to the beekeeper. I'm going to assume that we get a reference to the beekeeper in the next episode, just to know, because I'm sure Marvel already knows that people are like, hey, whatever happened to that beekeeper, they're gonna throw him back in there as just a quick reference to let you know, like, he's not dead. He just got turned into a beekeeper who's just in the background somewhere.
Would you go so far as to say he's generating a lot of buzz right now?
Probably. I think that's fair.
What? I'm sure if we put our hive mind together, we can figure it out.
Where do these come from, Darren?
An exhaustible well of brilliance is where they come from. I love it. Well, great. I think that's the terrible and wonderful puns are a great place to end it. Thank you, everyone, for watching and or listening to this. Once again, I've been Jack Packard, turning the radio off.
I've been Darren Mooney, sense of inadequacy.
I've been Casey Wosu, and that was pretty funny.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.